In the shadowed corridors of history, where the echoes of the past whisper secrets long forgotten, there exists a deity enshrined not just in darkness and death, but in the solemn duty of the end of all things. Jergal, the lord of the end of everything. In D&D, there's a lot of movement between the gods, and one of those positions that moves hands and responsibilities a lot is the god of death, or dead, or undead, or strife. Gods of murder, gods of bones, gods of darkness. But in ancient D&D history, there was but one god of strife, death, and the dead, and he was known as Jergal. Jergal fomented and fed on the discord among mortals and powers alike. When beings slew each other in their quest for power or in their hatred, he welcomed them into the shadowy kingdom of his eternal gloom. As all things died, everything came to him eventually, and over time he built his power into a kingdom, unchallenged by any other god. He was responsible for keeping records on the final resting place of all the dead, and strove for order in death, anticipating the ever-encroaching termination of all things. As the judge of the damned and the Grim Reaper, it was said that only Jergal knew the final disposition of every spirit and the day of every being's final death, and he was never wrong. The ultimate tyrant, no one unintentionally escaped Jergal's grasp once they fell under the aegis of his portfolio. Jergal never visibly angered, and always spoke with a disembodied, chilling voice that echoed with the dry whisper of a long-forgotten crypt. His tone was deceptively bland, and his demeanor excessively formal. Even his words portended horrors unimaginable. Totally focused on death, he perceived life as momentary existence before death's eternity. Jergal himself, the Lord of Death, was depicted as a wizened, insubstantial mummy of some ancient alien race, his skin gray and tightly strung across his frame. His bulbous yellow, lifeless eyes and insectoid mandibles resembled a cross between a humanoid and a praying mantis. His ears and nose were barely distinguishable from his elongated skull, and most of his body was covered with an utterly lightless cloak that seemed to absorb the very atmosphere that enveloped it. He wore white gloves, which covered elongated, claw-like hands and forearms, and a shadow-filled gray cloak that rose and fell as it buffeted by unseen wind. He clutched a thick scroll covered with intricate, incomprehensible script and a freshly inked quill in his hands. Jergal was said to be shadowy, a shadowy, sinister figure who left a vague feeling of unease and enervation in his wake. He had total command over the undead, animating, creating, summoning, dismissing, and dispelling them at will. It was said that with his gaze, Jergal could learn the sum total of a being's life, their joys, their fears, their acts, and their ultimate demise. And simply by inscribing a mortal's name on his voluminous scroll, he could inflict a being's fated demise immediately. His touch instilled fear, drained a being's life force, and could banish his victim to the realm of the dead with a thought. He could manifest himself as any undead creature, gaining all its innate abilities. He could also take the form of a mortal man with a great white beard, who was bent with extreme age yet held intelligence and a driving energy in his sunken eyes. His manifestation was accompanied by the sound of a heavy tome being closed with chilling finality. This manifestation often occurred upon the death of an exceptionally long-lived mortal, particularly one who had extended his or her life with potions of longevity and like magical manipulations, such as the magic of an archwizard. Most scholars believe Jergal to have arisen as the Netherese god of the dead, although few can explain his bizarre insect-like appearance. I could only find one theory on Jergal's origins, and that comes from a dragon magazine that states, in truth, Jergal is an alien god, brought to the realms millennia ago by a pod of spellweavers who settled in the region now known as the Chultangar. It is believed that one of the earliest Netherese archwizards studied necromancy with the spellweavers of the Chultangar before returning to Netheril, and that he founded the Church of Jergal upon his return. As I mentioned before, the position of the Lord of Death and associated roles like Undeath have changed hands many times. Jergal is the most ancient and first that we know about. He could be the first ever. But he has not maintained his position, and he did not lose it through a contest against him or his own death. Instead, there is a fairly popular story that is told about the transference of power. It is said that Jergal grew tired of his duties, for he knew them too well. And without challenge, there is nothing, and in nothingness, there is only gloom. In such a state, the difference between absolute power and absolute powerlessness is undetectable. During this dark era of Jergal arose three powerful mortals, Bane, Bal, and Merkel, who lusted after the power Jergal possessed. The trio forged an unholy pact that they would gain such ultimate power or die in the attempt. Over the length and breadth of the world they strode, seeking powerful magic and spells and defying death at every turn. No matter what monster they confronted or what spells they braved, the three mortals emerged unscathed at every turn. Eventually, the trio journeyed into the Grey Waste and sought out the Castle of Bone. Through armies of skeletons, legions of zombies, hordes of wraiths, and a gauntlet of liches, they battled. Eventually, they reached the object of their lifelong quest, the Bone Throne. "I claim this throne of evil," Bane the tyrant shouted to Jergal. "I'll destroy you before you can raise a finger," threatened Bal the assassin. "And I shall imprison your essence for eternity," promised Merkel the necromancer. Jergal arose from his throne with a weary expression and said, "The throne is yours. I have grown weary of this empty power. Take it if you wish. I promise to serve and guide you as your seneschal until you grow comfortable with the position." Then, before the stunned trio could react, the Lord of the Dead asked, "Who among you shall rule?" The trio immediately fell to fighting amongst themselves, while Jergal looked on with indifference. When eventually it appeared that either they would all die of exhaustion or battle for an eternity, the Lord of the End of Everything intervened. "After all you have sacrificed, would you come away with nothing? Why don't you divide the portfolios of the office by engaging in a game of skill for them?" asked Jergal. Bane, Bal, and Merkel considered the god's offer and agreed to it. So Jergal took the skulls of his three most powerful liches and gave them to the trio so they could compete in skull bowling. Each mortal rolled a skull across the Grey Waste, having agreed that the winner would be he who bowled the farthest. Baldur, the Beast Lord, arrived to visit Jergal at this moment. After quickly ascertaining that the winner of the contest would receive all of Jergal's power, he chased off after the three skulls to make sure that the contest would be halted until he had a chance to participate for part of the prize. Bane, Bal, and Merkel again fell to fighting, but again Jergal intervened. "Why don't you allow Lady Luck to decide, so you don't have to share with the beast?" The trio agreed to this alternative, and Jergal broke off his skeletal finger bones and gave them to the contestants. When Malar returned from chasing the skulls, he found that the trio had already finished their game of knucklebones. Bane cried out triumphantly, "As winner, I choose to rule for all eternity as the ultimate tyrant. I can induce hatred and strife at my whim, and all will bow down to me while in my kingdom." Merkel, who had won second place, declared, "But I choose the dead, and by doing so I truly win, because all that you are lord over, Bane, will eventually be mine. All things must die, even gods." Bal, who finished third, proclaimed, "I choose death, and it is by my hand that all that you rule, Lord Bane, will eventually pass to Lord Merkel. Both of you must pay honor to me and obey my wishes, since I can destroy your kingdom, Bane, by murdering your subjects, and I can starve your kingdom, Merkel, by staying my hand." Malar growled in frustration, but he could do nothing, and so yet again only the beasts were left for him. And Jergal merely smiled, for he had been delivered. Three mortals become gods, divvying up Jergal's responsibilities while he would serve them as a scribe, a seneschal. And indeed, this story can be corroborated across many sources, but there is one passage that seeks to challenge this myth. It states that the truth is rather more sinister than him growing bored and voluntarily dividing his portfolios. Jergal harbored great ambitions to bring all the realms under his rule, including all the other gods, and even Ao, the overgod. However, Ao's strictures prevented Jergal from growing beyond the status of a greater god, meaning that he could never force all the other gods to bow down before his throne. Undeterred, the Lord of the End of Everything hit upon a plan that would allow him to evade Ao's strictures. First, Jergal set in motion a series of prophecies that would mark the beginning of the Age of Worms, including inscribing a process on a set of bronze discs by which an ambitious mortal, Caius, could ascend to godhood. Second, Jergal embedded three compulsions in his own mind: give away his portfolios to three gods and profess to be bored with his role, consume those three gods after all three had been reborn, and consume the ascended mortal who followed the process noted above. Lastly, Jergal extracted all knowledge of this plan from his own mind, other than the latent compulsions, and placed it within the first green worm. Over time, Jergal's extracted knowledge was therefore split amongst all the worms created by Caius. This last step allowed the Lord of the End of Everything to avoid Ao's oversight, as Jergal himself was thereafter unaware of his own plan, and no one single creature knew the entire plan as well. This alternative makes a lot more sense for what we know about Jergal, Lord of the Dead. It is true that he most likely grew bored with his position, and even though he had the power of a greater deity, and took all the responsibilities on with ease that it took for 3 other gods to maintain themselves, he most likely has more ambition. That would also mean that his plan is currently in place, and many of the aspects of it have come to pass. In fact, all 3 of the gods that he gave power to have died, and, as his plan states, have been reborn. The only part of this plan that remains a bit foggy is how Jergal plans to enact the final leg of the plan, which is to consume the Dead 3 and Caius. Final part of Jergal's story actually comes from the video game Baldur's Gate 3. There will be spoilers for the video game Baldur's Gate 3 and spoilers for a Dark Urge playthrough. Many have already theorized that one of the characters within Baldur's Gate 3 is directly related to Jergal. There's a character called Withers that the player must run across at some point in a playthrough, a mysterious being that you run into in an ancient temple of Jergal on the Sword Coast. He clearly has ancient knowledge and a lot of knowledge about the Dead 3 who are central to the plot of Baldur's Gate 3. It is highly speculated and almost confirmed that Withers is at least an avatar of Jergal. And as Withers, Jergal provides magical support to the adventurers in exchange for a pittance of coin. Now obviously, besides him serving from a game mechanic of reviving dead teammates, he does have many story implications and a couple very interesting cutscenes. I'll try to stay a bit spoiler free here, but the Dark Urge is highly associated with Baal. And at one point in the story, Baal offers the Dark Urge a deal, and if they deny and reject him, they are murdered by Baal. If this happens, Withers shows up. Again, he clearly knows quite a bit about Baal and the Dead 3. He claims that he too still holds some power against the gods of life and death. He revives the player, overturning the powers of Baal. When asked who he is at this moment, he again just iterates he is a scribe, a seneschal, a keeper of records. And finally, at the end of the game, Withers is shown speaking to a painting of the Dead 3. He is clearly very disappointed in them. He insults their evil plan, of which is the main theme of Baldur's Gate 3, and asks them rhetorically if they really did not think he would notice what they were doing. And finally, he tells them that he overestimates them, and that the Dead 3 will trouble the world of the Forgotten Realms no longer. Considering this is one of the first substantial glimpses we get of Jergal, or any part of him, after the transference of power, it is very clear that he is still extremely powerful, and much more than a record keeper. He lies in almost a dormant state. He may no longer technically be the judge of the damned, or the Grim Reaper, or the god of anything. But this Jergal still knows the final disposition of every spirit, and the day of every being's final death when he writes them into his book. If any of the stories of his plan are true, he is waiting, fulfilling his duties, making sure none are suspicious of his long-term plan to become the Lord of everything. In fact, Jergal himself is unaware of this plan, or at least all of the fine details of it. But the day whatever trigger he has in place sets forth, the day all the worms of Caius, the day he consumes the Dead 3, and Caius is the day that the Lord of the End of Everything finally lives up to his name. If you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate if you liked, subscribed, and commented down below what types of videos you would like to see done next. Thanks everyone for watching.